They called it the Ronson Lighter. Lights up the first time, every time. They called it a death trap, a purple heart box. It was the tank sent into battle against German panzers that could kill it from a mile away, while its own 75mm gun couldn't even scratch their frontal armor at point-blank range. The men who crewed it knew the odds. They knew that facing a Tiger or a Panther in an M4 Sherman was a suicide mission. So how did this tank, this rolling coffin, this supposed catastrophic failure, end up parked in the ruins of Berlin? How did this death trap overwhelm and systematically crush the most feared and technologically advanced armored force the world had ever seen? The answer isn't what you've been told. The Sherman wasn't built to win a duel. It was built to win a war. When America was hurled into the Second World War in December 1941, it had a problem, a big one. It was a commercial giant, but a military dwarf. The U.S. Army was smaller than Portugal's. Its tank doctrine was confused, fragmented, and untested. Its best tank on paper, the M3 Lee, was already obsolete, a bizarre, tall-profiled machine with its main gun stuck in the side of the hull. America didn't just need a tank. It needed 10,000 tanks. And it needed them yesterday. The M4 Sherman was born not from a desire for perfection, but from a desperate need for production. It was designed around one simple, brutal calculation. What is the best tank we can mass produce right now using the engines, tools, and factories we already have? The answer was a compromise. It used the reliable chassis of the M3 Lee. It used a radial 9-cylinder aircraft engine, the Wright R975, simply because thousands were available. It had decent sloped armor for 1942, and it had a reliable all-purpose 75mm gun that could fire high explosive shells at infantry just as well as it could fire armor-piercing rounds at other tanks. It wasn't a world beater. It was a workhorse. And in 1942, when it first met German tanks in the deserts of North Africa, it was good enough. At El Alamein, the Sherman shocked Rommel's Afrika Korps. It was superior to the Panzer IIIs and the early Panzer IVs. It was reliable, fast, and its gun worked. For a brief, shining moment, the M4 was the king of the battlefield. But that moment wouldn't last. The Germans were innovators, and they responded to the Sherman and the Soviet 34 with a terrifying leap in technology. February 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Rookie American GIs in their first major battle against the Germans rolled forward with confidence in their Shermans. What rolled out of the dust to meet them was a monster. The Tiger won. Its armor was so thick, the Sherman's 75mm shells just bounced off, harmlessly. Meanwhile, the Tiger's gun, the legendary 88mm, could slice through a Sherman's armor from 2,000 yards away. That's over a mile. The American tanker in Normandy was now hopelessly, terrifyingly outgunned. The statistics were grim. In the dense bocage of France, it's estimated that for every Tiger or Panther lost, the Allies lost 5, sometimes 6 Shermans. The crews knew it. The Ronson jokes started. The bravado of North Africa was replaced by a cold, metallic fear. And this is where most stories about the Sherman end. They say it was a piece of junk. They say American commanders sacrificed their own men in cheap, inferior machines.
They say the American soldier only won through brute force and numbers. They are wrong. They've missed the real story. They've missed the 3 hidden secrets that made this death trap the single most important war-winning tank of World War II.
The first secret? It has nothing to do with combat. It has to do with failure. A Tiger tank was a masterpiece of engineering. Its interlocking road wheels gave it a smooth ride. Its 88mm gun was a marvel of ballistics. It was also a nightmare. It weighed 54 tons. It was over-engineered, complex, and horrifyingly unreliable. If a Tiger's transmission failed, which it did constantly, the crew needed a 20-ton crane and a full day of work, often under fire, just to access it. If one of the inner road wheels was damaged, the crew had to remove 8 outer wheels just to get to it. A Tiger tank in a repair shop was just 54 tons of useless, expensive steel. And by 1944, most German Panzers were in repair shops. Now look at the Sherman. It was designed by an industrial nation that understood one simple truth: everything breaks. The question is, how fast can you fix it? The Sherman was a marvel of maintainability. Its engine was mounted on rails. An experienced crew could pull a bad engine out and install a new one in a field in under 4 hours. Its parts were interchangeable. A part from a Sherman made in the Detroit Arsenal in 1942 would fit a Sherman made by Ford in 1944. This meant the Sherman had what tankers call operational availability, a fancy term for a simple war-winning concept. It worked. By late 1944, German operational reports were desperate. A Tiger division might have 50 tanks on paper, but only 5 available for combat. The rest were waiting for fuel or spare parts that would never come. Meanwhile, American armored divisions consistently reported operational rates of over 90%. The Germans had built a better dueling machine. The Americans had built a better war machine. The second secret is even more important. It addresses the death trap myth head-on. Let's be clear. The Ronson nickname was earned. The early Shermans had a fatal flaw. It wasn't their armor. It was their ammunition. The 75mm shells were stored in racks inside the crew compartment, protected only by a thin steel plate. When an enemy shell penetrated the tank, even if it didn't hit anyone, the shrapnel would tear into those racks. The result was a catastrophic fire. The propellant would ignite, turning the inside of the tank into a 3,000-degree inferno in seconds. The crews weren't being killed by enemy shells. They were being burned alive. American engineers saw the data, and they fixed it. This is the single most important upgrade of the Sherman's life, and the one most people have never heard of. They called it wet stowage. It was a brilliant, simple solution. First, they moved all the ammunition from the sponsons into the floor of the tank, below the turret. Second, they surrounded those new ammo bins with a water jacket, literally a casing filled with water and antifreeze. If shrapnel hit the bin, the liquid would pour out and extinguish any fire before it could start. The results were staggering. A U.S. Army study of tanks in 1944 found that a dry stowage Sherman had a 60 to 80% chance of catching fire when penetrated.
The new wet-stowage Shermans, the chance of fire dropped to 15%. 15. Suddenly, the Ronson was one of the least flammable tanks on the battlefield. In fact, that 15% chance of fire was lower than its German counterparts, the Panzer IV and the Panther, which had their own fire-prone design flaws. But the designers didn't stop there, because they understood the real secret to winning. It's not just about protecting the tank. It's about protecting the crew. A tank is just a steel box. The real weapon is the 5-man crew inside it, their skill, their morale, their experience. And this is where the Sherman truly excelled. It was designed to let its crew get out alive. Look at a Tiger. It's cramped. It has 2, maybe 3 escape hatches. If the tank is hit, the crew has to crawl over each other in a panic. Now look at the Sherman. It had 5 large escape hatches for a 5-man crew. 1 for the driver, 1 for the co-driver, 2 on top of the turret, and a 5th hatch on the floor of the tank, in case the tank rolled over or the top hatches were under fire. When a wet stowage Sherman was knocked out, the crew got out. They would scramble out of the hatches, run to the rear, and within a day they'd be assigned a brand new Sherman and be back in the fight. When a German tank was knocked out, the crew usually died with it, burned alive or trapped inside. This created a fundamental difference between the two armies. The German panzer force was constantly filling with green, inexperienced replacements. The American armored force kept its veterans. A U.S. tank platoon in 1945 was often crewed by the same men who had landed on D-Day. They knew every trick. They knew how to work together. They had lost their fear and replaced it with cold, lethal professionalism. The Sherman wasn't a tank. It was a schoolhouse. It was a survivable enough classroom that taught green farm boys how to become veteran tank killers. And the tuition for that education was paid in steel, not blood. This brings us to the third and most famous secret: the arsenal of democracy. The Germans built 1,347 Tigers. They built 5,976 Panthers. How many Shermans did America build? 49,000. This number is so large it's almost impossible to understand. America wasn't just building tanks for its own army. It was building them for the British, the Free French, the Poles, the Canadians, and even the Russians, who received over 4,000 of them. This ocean of steel completely changed the rules of the war. A German commander had to treat his single Panther like a precious jewel. He couldn't risk it. An American commander could spend his Shermans like bullets. And this led to the final brutal truth of the M4. The Sherman never fought fair. An American tanker wasn't supposed to get in a one-on-one duel with a Panther. To do so was stupid, and American doctrine forbade it. The Sherman was a combined arms weapon. When a Sherman platoon encountered a single Tiger, the call went out. Within minutes, that Tiger was being hammered by air support from P-47 Thunderbolts. It was being blinded by smoke shells. It was being blasted by artillery, zeroed in by a forward observer. And while the Tiger crew was buttoned up, deafened and terrified, the Shermans would move. They were faster, more maneuverable. They wouldn't attack from the front. They would execute a wolf pack tactic. 2 Shermans would fire at the Tiger's front, sacrificially, just to make it turn its turret. While it was distracted, 3 more Shermans would be racing through the smoke, flanking it from the side and rear, where its armor was weak. They would pour fire into its engine compartment until it burst into flames. The Tiger crew never stood a chance. They weren't beaten by a tank. They were beaten by a system. And even when the Sherman did have to fight on its own terms, it evolved. The myth of the pea-shooter gun is only half the story. By mid-1944, new Shermans were arriving armed with a high-velocity 76mm gun. It wasn't as good as the German 88, but it was good enough. It could kill Panthers and Tigers. And for the really tough targets, crews were issued an ace-in-the-hole, HVAP, high-velocity, armor-piercing, a silver bullet round with a tungsten core that could punch through even a Panther's frontal armor. They even created the M4 Jumbo, an assault variant with armor so thick it was immune to most German anti-tank guns. The Sherman wasn't a static design. It was a platform that was constantly being improved based on feedback from the men who were actually fighting in it.
So let's go back to our death trap. The M4 Sherman was certainly flawed. It was loud, its profile was too high, and the early models burned. But those flaws were irrelevant, because the war wasn't won by the tank with the biggest gun or the thickest armor. It was won by the tank that showed up. It was won by the tank that could be fixed on the side of a road with a wrench. It was won by the tank that could cross a rickety French bridge while a Tiger couldn't. It was won by the tank that could be pulled from a factory in Detroit, loaded onto a Liberty ship, and be in combat in France 3 weeks later. Germany built a series of technological marvels. They were masterpieces of tactical-level design, and they were a strategic-level disaster. America built a covenant. It was a promise written in steel from the factory floor to the frontline soldier. A promise that for every 1 tank you lose, we will send 5 more. A promise that if your tank is hit, you will survive to fight again. And a promise that you will never, ever fight alone. The M4 Sherman wasn't a death trap. It was the reliable, unstoppable, and perfectly good enough blade of an industrial giant. And it was the tank that truly won the war.